Last year's Oregon-Washington game was not particularly close. This year's game should be closer, right? Let's cross it over and find out.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for a crossover edition of Locked On Ducks and Locked On Huskies. I'm Spencer McLaughlin. That is Roman Tomashoff. Thank you all for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your number one source to stay up to date with your favorite teams. This episode brought to you by our friends over at 5-Hour Energy. Head to 5hourenergy.com to find over 15 flavors to choose from. Need one now? Grab a 5-Hour Energy shot at your local grocery or convenience store. Stock up today and stay energized. So, always, arguably, the biggest game on the schedule for either team, regardless of record. The game that you've just got to find a way to win. The good old-fashioned border war. So, let's talk about it, Roman. And we're going to get to this entire matchup here as we're in spring football. We might feel differently by the time fall camp rolls around and such because injuries and storylines can change and all that sort of stuff. But 49-21 last year is exactly what Oregon fans were looking for from Dan Lanning for his first win over Washington. They were 17.5-point favorites. That game was at Autzen Stadium. I have a sneaky suspicion that Oregon will not be a 17.5-point favorite in Seattle next year.
Yeah, a little bit where, obviously that's what Oregon fans were looking for, right? After losses when the games really
very much so.
When both teams were at the top of their game. I'm really excited to see what this game is going to look like this season because the trench battle is just going to be so different this year, right, Spencer? Where obviously Oregon has recruited a whole bunch of top-end trench players, especially on the defensive line, and you've rebuilt a whole offensive line through the transfer portal. And when I look at Washington, I see a team that last year you had to build it up through the spring transfer portal after losing the Joe Moore award-winning group. And you have some guys in there who are certainly expected to be a little bit more solid than you had last season. And as we, sit here and Washington hasn't started spring practice yet, who knows what that's going to look like, right? But I think when you look at what it was last year where Washington gave up 39 sacks, including 10 in this very matchup last season, it's hard to get worse than that. And with some of the bodies they have coming in and guys who have been in the program now for a year, 2 years, and aren't coming off of severe injuries, like one or two of them were last year as well, I think that that's certainly going to be where this game is won and lost, as most football games are, right? But I'm really excited about this because every aspect of this matchup is going to be so much different than we've seen over the course of the last few years.
I think the snapshot of this game, I can readily make the case trends in Washington's favor because I expect Oregon to take a step back. I say trends, Oregon fans, calm down. I'll get there in a moment. But I think Oregon is going to be a really good team. I don't think they will be as good as last year. I think Washington should be at least a little bit better than last year. And perhaps most importantly, Roman, this game is being played in Seattle, which is never an easy place to play. Oregon's won there many times over the years. But when you introduce a road environment for any team, it can get crazy. It can get weird, especially in a rivalry game. Now, I think the good news, and we'll talk more about the quarterbacks later on today's show, the good news for Oregon is whoever ends up starting at quarterback, probably Dante Moore, maybe Austin Novosad surprises us all, or they're starting a true freshman, Achilles Smith Jr. You never know. You never know, but it'll probably end up being Dante Moore. He'll be starting his first full season, whoever it is for the Ducks, at quarterback. And this game, being in rivalry week, as it should be, is the last week of the regular season. That quarterback will, assuming he stays healthy, already have gone to Penn State, will already have gone to Iowa, and will already have played both Indiana and USC as well. So I think kind of the new adjustment can, be that sort of concern can be lessened. If this were second week of the year and you had Dante Moore start, I think that'd be a bigger concern. But I think this game being consistently now at the end of the year in the Big Ten benefits any team that's working in a new quarterback.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. First of all, though, we got to talk about how weird it is, and it's awesome. It is absolutely awesome that this is the rivalry game at the end of the year. But as Pac-12 guys, as we both are, RIP, the whole Washington, Wazoo, the Apple Cup, and the Civil War rivalries not being that final week of the season, there's still a little bit of an adjustment.
Yes, I agree.
That part, I had to make sure I got that out there. So, and I'm really glad that you want to talk about, having to go to Penn State, having to do all that, because that's what Washington did last season, where you go to Rutgers, you go to Indiana, you go to Penn State, you go to Autzen. Like, those are all really tough environments. And you look at who Washington is bringing back this season. It's a lot of the key players, right? Where you think about Maximus McCree at left tackle is a name that I don't think people are going to mention very much, because he missed the back half of the season with a dislocated thumb. But he was somebody who got some of that road experience at left tackle. I expect him to potentially make a much bigger impact this season. And I start with him because it's going to be all the obvious names, right? Where it's Jonah Coleman, it's Damon Williams, it's Denzel Boston, Decker DeGraff at tight end, who's somebody I think can take a big step forward. And then on defense, it's Ephesians Prysock, it's Zach Durfee, it's Mikel Esteen at safety, just to name some of the returning guys, along with a lot of the players you have coming in who are now upperclassmen. When I think about Takario Davis, I think about some of the other guys that you bring in through the transfer portal. It's nice to know that you have that road experience. So from the Oregon perspective, yeah, absolutely. Those games are going to be very, very beneficial. And when I think about Damon Williams on the other side of that, it's nice to know that he had that he got a full fourth quarter at Iowa on the road. He got a full second half at Penn State in the whiteout. He got to start at Oregon. And these are all games that Washington lost last season. But the fact that you have that experience under his belt now is something that should be greatly beneficial in 2025. And it's something that could make this game just even more exciting. The fact that now you have that experience on both sides. Because I look at Washington's schedule, and all the toughest games that they're going to have to play this season, in my opinion at least, are all at home. When Ohio State comes to town, when Illinois comes to town, those are all going to be very tough games. And I'm not saying going to Michigan, going to Wisconsin isn't going to be difficult, but I think that the teams that are coming into Washington are just a little bit better as of right now.
When I think about the line that could get set on this game, there isn't one right now, according to our friends at FanDuel. I'd imagine, Roman, for whatever it's worth, some people, the lines don't matter. Well, okay. I'm not in that camp. They don't mean everything, but
right.
they matter a little bit because it tells you what, metrics and analytical analyses of college football teams tell you about what teams are fully capable of. Right now, going into spring ball, I'd say Oregon's probably 7-ish. I bet you that line hovers around 7.5. And, home field advantage typically is worth about 6 points, 3 to go away from the home team or the other team's home stadium, and 3 to go up to and on the road. And then you couple that with Oregon, I don't think being at the same level and still having a new quarterback who'll have 11 games under his belt, hopefully, of course. But that's kind of where I look at these rosters right now. I don't know if you see it that way as well, but in Husky Stadium, I'd imagine Oregon's probably anywhere from a 6 to 7 point favorite.
That's something to be completely honest, I haven't thought about too much because at the end of the day, it's something you and I talked about with this matchup last year around this time, where that completely different story involving the rosters and what each team's aspirations were going into last season. But when I look at this game, the one thing that I think might necessarily be a little bit underrated is especially for the Oregon side of things, is exactly what Washington went through last year. Where Spencer, it's 20 starters that aren't coming back from last season's team. I could be overestimating that a little bit, but it's
for Oregon, you mean?
Yeah.
It's Oregon. A big number. They're 105th in the country in returning production at 43%. By comparison, Washington is 84th, which isn't huge, but they're at 52%. So I mean, that's at least a little bit higher than what Oregon has coming back.
Right, but and it's something we talked about on our Big Ten Squad show. Shameless plug. Make sure you go check that out as well. That. With Washington, it's key pieces. It's Damon Williams. It's Jonah Coleman. It's Denzel Boston, where a lot of those big pieces are coming back. And that was something that, I was a little bit higher on this Washington team than I think the general consensus was last season, where it's, hey, you're still bringing back this guy. I think this might work out. I think that might work out. But when you lose that many starters, that's something you really can't underestimate. So, and I'm not saying that to knock Oregon in any way, as I'm sure I will hear a little bit about, but that is something that I greatly overestimated last year, especially on the offensive line, where bringing in 4 or 5 new starters is very, very difficult. And the fact that this is at the end of the season will be beneficial. But if there are some problems up there for Oregon, especially early on in the season, no matter how good those players are in their transfer portal rankings, you shouldn't be surprised by that.
The trenches always do indeed matter. How could these trenches play out going into the game next year. That and much more is coming up next. First, this episode brought to you by Nissan. We're all about the stats because numbers don't lie. When it comes to the all-new Nissan Armada Pro 4X, the numbers are on an MVP level, or Heisman level, if you will. With the ability to tow up to 8,500 pounds, it can quite literally carry the whole team, plus the gear wherever you need to go. It's powered by a twin-turbo V6 engine, delivering the strength and performance to handle highways, back roads, and everything in between. And with room for up to 8 people, the Armada Pro 4X is built for big crews, big adventures, and even bigger memories. Whether you're exploring off-road trails or rolling up to the arena, the Armada Pro 4X brings power, versatility, and style wherever you go. Take your adventures to new heights in the all-new Nissan Armada Pro 4X. Learn more at nissanusa.com. Then, if you want to learn more about college football, there's a lot of great information over there with our friends at FanDuel, and they've got you covered for March Madness too. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. You want to stay in the action all tournament long? FanDuel lets you do that. You want to bet on college football? You can do that. Oregon's win total is 10.5. Washington's is 7.5. How do you feel about each of those programs? Hey, you tell me. Put your money where your mouth is. Over, under, or national title, Big Ten title odds. Those are over there as well at FanDuel.com. Get in on all the college hoops and college football action all year long. FanDuel.com. Go check them out. Well, Roman, I don't think I'm breaking any news to Husky fans out there listening to or watching this show when I say that for Washington to get back in the win column against Oregon next year, the offensive line cannot allow 10 sacks. Scorching hot take.
What?
Scorching hot
from?
take. I know. It's straight off the surface of the sun. But 10 sacks, a program record for Oregon, or tied a program record. Do you feel like Washington's offensive line is going to be able to do better than that? And if so, by how much?
Oh, you're setting such a low bar, man. Yeah, no, I absolutely. Where I like the investments that they made in the transfer portal, especially in Kansas State tackle Carver Willis, where I really like what he brings to the table, where it's a solid presence for one season, and you don't necessarily need much more than that. Where we've had the conversation over on Locked On Huskies with Jedd Fisch and his coaching staff, and with Carver Willis himself, he doesn't know if he's going to play left tackle or right tackle yet, where there's been conversations about, hey, we'd like you at left. He played right at Kansas State. He excelled at right tackle at Kansas State. So I'm curious to see what that's going to look like, where he's going to be a really solid piece on the offensive line. Where I'm really looking at where it's going to improve is on the interior. I'm really high, and if you talk to anybody around Washington's program about what the offensive line is going to look like, the first name out of their mouth will probably always be Paki Finau. Redshirt freshman from California in the 24 class, stayed on after the transition from Kalen DeBoer to Jedd Fisch, played really well in the Sun Bowl. I believe he was the highest graded offensive lineman in terms of Pro Football Focus, which is just the best fit narratives, by the way. Shout out to PFF for that. And I'm really excited about what his potential could be. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up being the starting right guard or left guard, to be honest with you, by the time the season rolls around. And with Lanning Hatchett moving over from right guard, where he played a lot last season, to his natural position of center, having a full offseason in the weight room after coming off a torn ACL and still playing in every game in 2024 should be greatly beneficial for him, because you're not going to be where you want to physicality-wise in the Big Ten when you're not able to actually go through offseason workouts and you're just trying to get back on the field. So I'm really excited to see what that's going to look like. And again, this is all to clear a very low bar that you've set for me of 10 sacks. So thank you for that. But I certainly do believe that this offensive line is going to take a big step forward last season, which, again, last time I'm going to say this, not a high bar when you allow 39 sacks, which is the most in the Big Ten last season.
Yeah, that certainly has to be better for Washington. I think when you contrast it with Oregon's defensive line, it kind of mirrors the, game snapshot that I mentioned earlier on the show, where, I don't think Oregon's defensive line can be as good as last year, but they're still going to be really good. I don't think Oregon's team can be as good as last year, but I still expect them to make the playoff and push to get into the Big Ten championship game. But this defensive line for the Ducks, right now, your first four are probably Mateo Uiagalelei, who's going to be a first-round pick, Amari Washington, who I think is going to have a breakout season for the Ducks, Bear Alexander, the USC/Georgia transfer, who's been a journeyman, and I don't know what to expect. I know what his potential is.
Sure.
I don't know if that tandem matches up to Derek Harmon and Jamari Caldwell, who were just wreaking havoc for this Washington offensive line last year. And then your defensive end spot, you're probably looking at Tatum Tuioti, who started really the last 2 years with the Ducks. But no Derek Harmon, no Jamari Caldwell, no Jordan Birch. I still look at, what Oregon has up front and the depth they have behind it. This should still be one of the 3 to 4 best units in the Big Ten. It just won't be, as I said last year, and I think I was right in doing so, the best defensive line Oregon had since 2014 when they had DeForest Buckner, who was the Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year, and Eric Armstead. So I think this defensive line is still a really, really plus unit for the Ducks. And then you flip around, I have far more questions about Oregon's offensive line.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm curious from a Washington standpoint what you think about the front four in particular, because I know the talent for this Oregon offensive line is there, but there's just one returner from last year. Now it's a starting center, which is probably the one position you'd want to return when you're dealing with all that turnover, maybe that or left tackle, but center's the guy who's making all the calls and whatnot. So I know the talent is there with all the transfers they've brought in, but that matchup against the Huskies front four, the Oregon offensive line dominated last year. Dylan Gabriel had plenty of time to throw. Oregon ran the ball well. They created more explosive runs, really, than they had in several weeks in Big Ten conference play. So what do you make of that matchup, the Huskies D-line against the Oregon's front five?
So the first thing that I expect from this Washington defensive line is that it's going to be a whole lot deeper this season, because Jedd Fisch and this coaching staff went out and they invested in the position. They got Samote Peppa from Utah, who is an all Pac-12 first teamer in 2022. And then certainly I think he dealt with some injuries due to overuse, especially early in 2024, which was tough to see because he's a really big athletic body that you like to see in the middle. And it was something we were talking about with our good buddy Jake Butt over on Locked On Huskies, is this isn't a front four, Spencer. It's a front five. Where one thing that we saw in last year's matchup, and we talked about on this show when we did our game preview last year, is that Steve Belichick liked to blitz a lot. Obviously, he's out. He's at North Carolina, and Ryan Walters is in. Ryan Walters likes to run a 5-1-5 sort of defense where it's 3 just true interior defensive linemen, 2 outside linebackers, and 1 inside backer, and then a nickel front, or a nickel on the back end. So I'm curious to see what that might look like with more depth, where I think about guys like Omar Khan, Bryce Butler, and Alinius Davis, who could all take a step forward. And then truly enigmas where where one of them has. Javon Parker has excelled when he's been on the field, but he suffered a torn Achilles at Rutgers last year. So we didn't see him for any of the back half of the season. And that Rutgers game was the best of his career. He got graded a 94, somewhere in that ballpark, by PFF, and just looks like a future NFL player on the interior of the defensive line. You pair that with Taitai Uyunglele, who you're bringing in from Arizona, who has had 45 pressures over the last 2 seasons, been solid enough. Ontario Thompson, who's got some Big Ten experience at Iowa, blocked a couple of punts there and is a good athlete on the interior, plus Peppa, plus all these other guys that you're bringing back. It's not necessarily going to inspire confidence, where I'm sure Oregon fans can say, you're throwing out a whole bunch of names and not talking about the production to back it up, where the production is fine. It's average, but you didn't have depth. Where Spencer, you're talking about, hey, yeah, Derek Harmon, Jamar Caldwell are out. All these guys are out, but there's still solid depth behind them. This is solid depth where if Alinius Davis breaks out, like I expect him to, Omar Khan looks like somebody he's a state champion wrestler from Texas, who as a redshirt freshman could certainly become a really good run defender. I look at all these guys and say, you weren't able to get any pressure in this game last season, where Dylan Gabriel had like 8 seconds to throw on every single play. If I really wanted to pull out a stopwatch and count, I'm not going to do that because I will not go back and watch that game for obvious reasons.
I might.
But I'm sure you will. I'll go back and watch the 2023 games when they actually mattered. But
classic Huskies living in the past. Yeah. Anyway, continue.
Right, here we go again. No, but Javon's brother Armon has not played a snap yet at UW, just to throw out the final name there, where they're twin brothers who Armon was the more touted guy coming out of Michigan, and they're really promising athletes on the interior. He's had some really unfortunate injury luck, so I can't throw him out as a name to count on right now, but he's got such great talent. If he is on the field this fall, all this equates to something that this defensive line did not have last season, which is much better depth.
Fight Night's coming up next. You don't want to miss Fight Night. Fight Night's going to be a fun time. First, this episode brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Daylight savings snuck up on us again, and if you're feeling that lost hour of sleep, 5 Hour Energy has your back. The extra sunshine means more time for fun, but sometimes you need a little boost to power through. Whether you're staying up late watching the NCAA tournament, squeezing in a round of golf after work, or just trying to keep up with your busy day, 5 Hour Energy gives you that quick, refreshing pick-me-up whenever you need it. Plus, you can bring them on the go. They're small, they fit in your pocket, and you just pop them back and boom, you've got an extra boost. Whether you're at a game or traveling, 5 Hour Energy is easy to grab and keeps you feeling refreshed. I had one the other day because I needed to power through work, and guess what? I powered through with a vengeance because of 5 Hour Energy. Head to 5hourenergy.com to find over 15 flavors to choose from, including watermelon, blue raspberry, or peach mango, a personal favorite of mine. You can even build your own 12-pack or 24-pack delivered right to your door. Need one now? Grab a 5 Hour Energy shot at your local grocery or convenience store. They're everywhere. Stock up today and stay energized with 5 Hour Energy.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the bracket breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
You've heard of the rumble in the jungle, but have you heard of the verbal malice at the palace that's about to take place on this show? So, Roman, let's defend our quarterbacks here. I'll presume, because I think it's a safe assumption, but nothing's 100%, that Dante Moore will be starting for Oregon in this game, and Damon Williams will be starting for Washington in this game. So because I'm just so incredibly gracious and kind, I will let you go first and say why you like Damon Williams more than Dante Moore.
Spencer, what an honor. First of all, I thought you were going to say, I'm going to presume and then start with Damon, and that was going to be a more scorching hot take than the offensive line when we had a little bit earlier. So here, I'll give you a whole bunch of fun reasons why I'm so excited about Damon Williams, where, first of all, we have to start with just what his ceiling is, not just as a passer, but as a runner as well. Where I look at what this backfield could be with not only Jonah Coleman, but Adam Muhammad, who showed so many different flashes last year, plus Jordan Washington, who looks like he could be a legit low 4.3 guy, plus Damon, who Jedd has said at numerous occasions is the fastest player on the team. There could be a whole lot of talent coming out of the backfield, and with Damon's athleticism, you saw that play that he made in the Sun Bowl where he shakes one sack, spins out of another one, and then just gets absolutely demolished and delivers a dime 15 yards down the field to Jeremiah Hunter, who we talked about that with him at his pro day, and he said, yeah, that's the craziest play I've ever seen a quarterback make. I've never seen anything like that. You couple that with the fact that he's got a couple of starts under his belt, one on the road at Oregon when they're the number one team in the country, plus experience at Penn State in the whiteout, at Iowa, in every single game this year, during his freshman season, in different situations, where I think about a 3rd and 6 throw that he completed to Jeremiah Hunter on a slant route against Michigan at a really key time in that ball game. You look at every single game that he played in this year, it was exactly the plan that Jedd Fisch laid out for him, where he said, hey, we want to get this guy in a whole bunch of different situations and let him go and let him learn on the fly. And burning his red shirt and finding a way to do that was a really effective way to go about it. You look at his numbers, especially in those 2 games where he played the entire game. It's not like he played at a high-risk, high-reward style where he's throwing the ball all over the place. His completion percentage in both those starts combined is 82.5%. It was 78% for the season. So it's not like he's this run-first guy who doesn't necessarily know how to throw the ball. No, he has a very talented arm. And if we're talking about him as a top 3 quarterback in the Big Ten come the end of the season, I don't think I'm going to be surprised. And I really don't believe that anybody should be.
I think this quarterback matchup is so potentially fascinating because of where the floors and ceilings are for both guys. Because Williams definitely flashed last year, and he's got the same play caller in Jedd Fisch, and a couple of the same familiar faces, Jonah Coleman at running back and Denzel Boston at wide receiver. And I still do think, even though that's slightly different than what I'm about to mention, Jackson Arnold at Oklahoma played in the bowl game against Jedd Fisch's Arizona Wildcats, by the way, a couple of years ago, and he looked like the 5-star mega talent he was coming out of high school. He had a couple of turnovers. I think he had 3 interceptions or something and maybe was stripped, but he had over 300 yards passing and multiple touchdowns. And Oklahoma fans felt coming into last year, yeah, well, we saw a glimpse of it. That means it's going to carry over into the season. And then there was an offense coordinator change, which influenced it, but Jackson Arnold was not the savior of Oklahoma's offense. He's now at Auburn. I think about that career trajectory for both of these guys, but it's slightly different because Damon has more playing experience at Washington, whereas Dante Moore has taken one meaningful snap at Oregon, and that was against Michigan State, and he handed the ball off. But I got to tell you, it was a 5-star handoff. He did it better than anybody else. So I think that the Dante Moore question and the Damon Williams question make this one an even more interesting game. And we'll know so much more about these guys by the time the season plays out, of course. But the ceiling on both of them is crazy high. And I think Damon has more of a running component than Dante Moore does. I don't think Dante's immobile. I do think as a passer, Dante's got a higher ceiling. His arm talent, the way that he can drop down to different angles is kind of Matt Stafford light. I will never directly compare anyone to Matt Stafford because that's one of the craziest arm talents in the history. I love watching me some Matt Stafford. In the history of football, Matt Stafford's crazy. But the precision Dante Moore is capable of throwing with, what this Will Stein offense has really done, I over the last couple of years with quarterbacks, I think that Dante Moore has the higher ceiling as a passer. But again, I think the floor for both of these guys is still really low. Damon, because we haven't seen over the course of a whole season, no one's made game plans for him or adjusted, throughout the course of the year. And for Dante, we saw what the floor is at UCLA. It's throw too many interceptions and get benched midway through the season.
So I want to first talk about the offensive coordinator point, especially when you talk about Damon Williams, because that might be a question that arises with Brennan Carroll going to the Las Vegas Raiders to coach with his dad, where personally that's not something I'm concerned about when, I think about Washington, where Jedd Fisch said even during different points last season that, yeah, Brennan Carroll's the offensive coordinator, but the guy that I'm bouncing stuff off of is Jimmy Doherty, the quarterback's coach and now offensive coordinator, who is the guy up in the booth. So there's no change in play caller, no change in the structure of how the offense is called and run in any way, shape, or form. I think that now with a full offseason to work, that we're going to see a little bit more from Damon, and hopefully, we talked about earlier, a better offensive line is going to help him take a step forward where you bring in a guy who can really stretch the field in Omari Evans from Penn State. You expect somebody like Rasheed Williams or Kevin Green Jr. to break out as a safety threat underneath. Plus, you got Decker DeGraff at tight end, who looked really good last year, was a freshman All-American, and having him plus Quentin Moore, plus more depth in that room, where you had 2 healthy tight ends last year, is something that's really helpful. I think the biggest thing that people have been concerned about on the Damon Williams front is his stature and getting hurt. Now, that's something that I don't necessarily know how I feel about because you never want to predict an injury. That's certainly never a route that anybody wants to go down. But when I talk about Jedd Fisch having a very detailed plan for a lot of these guys, that's something that he's talked about with Damon, where it sounds like he's added somewhere between 10 and 15 pounds of muscle throughout the course of the offseason. Now, let's see how that translates on the field, right? And that's, who cares about muscle if it doesn't help you translate and play at, that's not a road we need to go down today. But when I look at Damon's floor, I have to say, I believe it's higher than what Dante Moore can bring to the table because we've seen it with Dante, as you referenced during his time at UCLA. When I look at what Damon can bring to the table, Jedd Fisch's offense is structured in such a way that allows him to, I don't want to say bail out on certain plays, but it's something we saw at Arizona where with no Fita, with Jaden DeLora, that if the options are not there, that you can take 3-4 yards on the ground on a play and be happy with it. And that's something that I'm really curious to see how that might play out over the course of the season. And with Damon's athleticism, that's why I referenced staying healthy, where if he's going to do that, he took the second most carries on this team last season. Even when you take out rushing attempts with sacks, which is a conversation.
Don't get me going. Don't get me going on sacks and TFLs, Roman. Don't do it. The weekend is almost here. Don't rile me up.
And especially rushing attempts as sacks. No, we're not doing that. It pisses me off too. But I say that to say, Demond is going to be a really important part of this rushing attack. And if you're, being smart with the football and just picking up 3-4 yards and getting out of bounds on certain plays, I think that because Demond showed during his freshman season, even as a true freshman, that he's smart enough to know that and not force something downfield when he doesn't have to. I think that that's something that is certainly underrated when you talk about him being, an 18, 19-year-old true freshman last season.
I'm just excited to watch these guys play. The season's a lot closer than you might think. We're almost to April, which is, close to May, which is basically June and July, which go by in the blink, and then August will be here. Then the season will roll around. But this shall not be the last time we cross over. If you have questions about the team that you root for, or the other team, you drop them in the YouTube comments below. Hit us up on Twitter, all that good stuff. Roman Tomashoff, Locked On Huskies. I'm Spencer McLaughlin, Locked On Ducks. Appreciate everyone listening. We will see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.